The moon died on a Tuesday. It was 4:47 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. Most of the eastern seaboard was asleep. The night shift workers were halfway through their shifts, hunched over consoles in control rooms, drinking cold coffee. The bars in New York and Philadelphia and Washington were emptying out, the last drunks stumbling into cabs, muttering about the time. The sky was clear over the Atlantic. The moon was full, a bright silver disk hanging over the water, the way it had hung there for 4.5 billion years. Steady. Familiar. Eternal. The Zenthari dreadnought purest light dropped out of fold space at 4 hours 47 minutes and 3 seconds. It appeared without warning, without detection, without any of the usual gravitational ripples that preceded a fold space exit. One moment the sky above the Atlantic was empty. The next moment, a ship the size of Manhattan was hanging in low lunar orbit, its hull black and angular and ugly against the silver face of the moon. No running lights. No identification signal. No communication. Just a shape in the dark, vast and silent and wrong. 3 ground-based telescopes captured its image within 2 seconds. The images hit mission control in Houston at 4 hours 47 minutes and 9 seconds. A junior analyst named Derek Foy was the first human to see the ship. He stared at his screen for 4 seconds. Then he picked up his phone. Then he put it down because he did not know who to call. There was no protocol for this. No procedure. No one had ever seen a Zenthari warship before. No one had ever expected to. The ship fired at 4 hours 47 minutes and 14 seconds. 11 seconds. That was all the warning the world got. 11 seconds between detection and impact. Not enough time to evacuate. Not enough time to warn. Not enough time to do anything except look up. The weapon was a gravitational lance. It did not explode the moon. It did not crack it open or shatter it or burn it. It compressed it. For a span of 9 seconds, the entire lunar mass was squeezed inward by a factor of 6. The surface folded in on itself. Mountains the size of continents drove downward into valleys. Craters collapsed. The regolith liquefied under pressures that should not have existed outside the core of a dying star. The moon screamed. Not in sound. In gravity. The compression sent ripples through the Earth-Moon system, and sensitive instruments in every observatory on the planet registered a spike that made no sense. Seismographs jumped. Tide gauges went haywire. Satellites in lunar orbit lost signal. Then the lance released. The moon expanded back outward. But it was wrong now. The internal structure was shattered. The iron core was misaligned by 11 degrees. The mantle was fractured in 1,000 places. Tidal forces that had been stable since the moon's formation went chaotic in the space of a heartbeat. Within 6 hours, the moon broke. Not all at once. It started with a crack visible from Earth, a dark line running across the face of the full moon like a vein. Then the crack widened. Then the face split. 3 large pieces separated, tumbling slowly, catching the sunlight at different angles. The rest became debris. Thousands of fragments, ranging from the size of cities to the size of pebbles, spreading outward in a glittering ring. Within 12 hours, the debris field threatened the orbital stations. Emergency evacuations began. The International Space Complex lost 2 modules to fragment impacts. 3 crew members died in the decompression. The Mars Transit Authority suspended all launches. The lunar monitoring station went dark and never came back. Within 24 hours, Earth's tides went mad. The Moon's gravitational pull, now distributed across 3 separate masses moving in different orbits, created interference patterns in the oceans. The tides did not rise gradually. They surged. 40-meter waves hit the Pacific coast. The Indian Ocean swelled and swallowed shorelines. The Atlantic heaved. The water did not come in like a tide. It came in like a wall. Like a fist. Like something angry. Jakarta went under in 11 minutes. Mumbai in 14. Lagos in 9. Lima in 23. The water came in fast and high and it did not stop. It filled streets and buildings and subway tunnels. It carried cars and buses and pieces of houses. It carried people. It carried children. It carried the old and the young and the ones in between. It carried them all. 800,000 people died. Not on the Moon. There was no colony there anymore. Not since the Helium-3 operations moved to Mars in 2187. They died on Earth. In the water. In the dark. In the screaming, churning, unstoppable dark. They died holding hands. They died alone. They died mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-breath. They died reaching for phones that would never ring again. They died reaching for children they would never hold again. They died reaching for nothing, because there was nothing to reach for, because the water was everywhere and it was fast and it did not care. The Zenthari broadcast a message 6 hours after the attack. It was short. 43 seconds. The Zenthari high speaker, Vale Thren, looked into the camera. He was tall and pale, with 4 eyes arranged in a vertical line down his face. His expression was calm. Almost bored. Like a man reading a grocery list. People of Earth. This was a demonstration. You have refused 3 trade agreements. You have rejected our territorial claims in the Orion Corridor. You have insulted our ambassadors and dismissed our legitimate grievances. We do not ask again. Accept our terms within 1 standard year, or the next lance targets your world directly. This was mercy. Remember it. The broadcast ended. In Mumbai, on the roof of a parking structure, a woman named Priya Desai sat with her knees drawn up to her chest. The water was 4 meters below her, brown and churning, carrying pieces of a life she would never get back. She held her phone in both hands. The screen showed a photograph of her daughter, Anika. Age 7. Taken 3 days ago at a school art fair. Anika was smiling. She had a smear of blue paint on her left cheek. Her hair was in 2 uneven pigtails. She was holding up a painting of a cat. The cat was orange and lopsided and had 5 legs. Anika had been very proud of it. Anika's school was in the flood zone. There had been no evacuation time. The water came too fast. The teachers tried to get the children to the upper floors, but the building was old, and the stairs were narrow, and there were too many children, and the water did not care about any of that. It came in through the windows. Through the doors. Through the walls. It came in from every direction at once, and it did not stop, and it did not slow down, and it did not give anyone time to say goodbye. Priya sat on the roof for 9 hours. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not call anyone. She held the phone and watched the water and did not move. The sun rose. The sun climbed. The water did not recede. Priya did not move. A rescue team found her at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She was still holding the phone. She was still looking at the water. They wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She did not acknowledge them. They led her to a boat. She let them lead her. But she did not look up. She did not look at the sky. She could not look at the sky. The sky was where the moon used to be, and the moon was gone, and looking up meant seeing the empty place, and she could not bear the empty place. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In Lagos, a woman named Adiz Okafor stood on the shoreline after the water pulled back. The shoreline was unrecognizable. The harbor was gone. The boats were gone. The market stalls were gone. The fish smoke that had hung in the air every morning for 30 years was gone. Everything was gone. Just mud and wreckage and the smell of salt and diesel and something else. Something organic. Something she did not want to identify. Her husband Thomas was gone. He had been in his boat. He had seen the wave coming. He had tried to warn the harbor. He had shouted into his radio. Wave coming. Big one. Get to high ground. Get the children to high ground. The radio had crackled. Then the wave hit. Then nothing. Adiz stood on the shoreline and listened to the silence where his voice should have been, and she did not move for a long time. In Lima, an old man named Samuel Briggs had refused to evacuate. His neighbor, a young woman named Rosa, had knocked on his door. She had shouted over the sirens. She had grabbed his arm. He had pulled away. "I survived 2 hurricanes, girl," he said. "I'm not running from a wave." He sat in his living room with a cup of tea. The tea was Earl Grey. He had made it 20 minutes before the water hit. He had not finished it. The cup was found later on the roof of what had been his house. It was empty. The tea was gone. Samuel was gone. Rosa survived. She carried his story for the rest of her life. She told it to everyone who would listen. And many who would not. Around the world, 800,000 stories like these were happening at the same time. And 1 million more. And 10 million more. Not all of them ended in death. Some ended in loss of home. Loss of livelihood. Loss of the shape of a life that had taken decades to build. A fisherman whose boat was gone. A teacher whose school was rubble. A grandmother whose house had been her mother's house, and her grandmother's before that, and now was just wet wood and broken glass and a smell that would never fully go away. The grief was the same everywhere. The sudden, stupid, pointless grief of a thing that should not have happened, happening anyway. The moon hung in pieces in the sky. Everyone could see it. 3 chunks, tumbling slowly, catching the sunlight wrong. A ring of dust where the familiar silver circle had been. The sky was broken. Everyone had to look up and see it. Everyone had to see what was missing. Children pointed at it. Old people stared at it. Lovers stopped in the street and looked up and felt something cold settle into their stomachs. The moon was gone. The one constant. The one thing that had always been there. Gone. And then, 6 hours after the Zenthari broadcast, the governments of Earth went quiet. Not the panicked, chaotic quiet of shock. Not the stunned silence of disbelief. This was a decision to be quiet. The United Earth Council convened in emergency session. The session was closed. No press. No broadcasts. No statements to the public. No words of comfort. No promises of retaliation. No anger. No grief. Nothing. For 11 days, Earth said nothing. The galaxy watched. 412 species watched the blue planet and waited for the screaming. The rage. The demands. The threats. The emotional, messy, human response that every species expected, because humans were emotional, because humans were messy, because humans were supposed to rage and weep and throw themselves at the enemy in a blaze of fury and die gloriously and make a good story out of it. It did not come. Earth was quiet. And in that quiet, something was being built. The United Earth Council met in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The bunker had been built during the resource wars of the 2090s and had never been decommissioned. It was 300 meters underground, surrounded by granite, accessible only by a single rail tunnel. The walls were bare concrete. The air smelled like recycled oxygen and old metal. A long table dominated the center of the room, with 23 chairs arranged around it. Water pitchers. Paper cups. No windows. No decorations. A single screen on the far wall showing the debris field where the moon used to be. The three chunks tumbled slowly in the image, catching light that was not there anymore. 23 members sat at the table. The heads of every major nation. The directors of the Space Defense Initiative, the Diplomatic Corps, and the newly formed Grief Response Bureau. They had been in session for 6 hours. No food had been served. No breaks had been taken. 6 hours of talking in circles, of proposals and counter-proposals, of anger and grief and the desperate, clawing need to do something, anything, because doing nothing felt like dying. Secretary General Orrin Hale sat at the head of the table. He was 63 years old. His hair was gray and thinning. He had lost his sister, Ruth, in the Lagos surge. She had been 60 years old. She had been retired. She had been teaching children to read in a volunteer program, 3 days a week, in a small building near the harbor. The water took her and the building and the children she had been reading to. 4 of the children survived. Ruth did not. Hale had not slept in 11 days. His eyes were red-rimmed. His hands were steady. He had not cried in front of anyone. He did not know if he had cried in private. The 11 days were a blur of meetings and calls and decisions, and there had been no time for private anything. No time to sit with the grief. No time to call Ruth's friends. No time to go through her things. No time to be a brother who had lost his sister. Only time to be a leader. And a leader could not cry. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The Zenthari expect us to negotiate, Hale said. His voice was flat. Tired. But clear. They expect us to be angry. They expect us to threaten. They expect us to come to the table shaking and furious and willing to trade sovereignty for safety. That is what they have planned for. That is what their entire military posture is designed to respond to. They have 300 warships. We have 47. They know we cannot win a fight. They expect us to know that too. They expect us to fold. He paused. He looked around the table. 23 faces. Tired. Angry. Grieving. Waiting. We are not going to give them that. General Yuki Tanaka, head of Space Defense, leaned forward. She was a small woman, 55, with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes. She had served in 3 border conflicts before taking the space defense post. She knew what 47 ships could do against 300. The answer was, die bravely. Secretary General, with respect. We have a fleet. 47 ships. The Zenthari have 300. Their dreadnoughts carry gravitational weapons that can compress a planet. We cannot win a conventional engagement. We all know this. I will not send our crews to die for a gesture. I know, Hale said. And we're not going to try. Admiral Chen, the naval commander, frowned. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a habit of drumming his fingers on the table when he was thinking. He was drumming now. Then what? We surrender? We accept their terms? We hand over the Orion corridor and bow our heads and pretend 800,000 people didn't die? No. Then what are we doing, Oren? Admiral Chen dropped the formality. They had known each other for 30 years. They had served together on the Terra Nova during the Belt Crisis. They had drunk together and fought together and buried friends together. Because right now, 800,000 people are dead, and the moon is in pieces, and you're telling us we're not fighting, we're not negotiating, so what the hell are we doing? Hale stood up. He walked to the screen. He looked at the debris field. 3 chunks of the moon, tumbling. A ring of dust. 4.5 billion years of history reduced to rubble in 9 seconds. He pressed his hand against the screen. The glass was cold. We are going to build something, he said. The room went quiet. The water pitcher gurgled. Someone shifted in their chair. The Zenthari killed 800,000 people, Hale continued. He did not turn from the screen. His hand stayed pressed against the glass, against the image of the broken moon. They broke our sky. They expect us to respond with violence because violence is what they understand. Violence is what every species in this galaxy understands. You hit me, I hit you back. You break my moon, I break your fleet. An eye for an eye. A wound for a wound. That is the language of this galaxy. That is the only language anyone respects. That is the only language anyone expects. He turned to face the room. His hand came away from the screen. His palm was damp. We are not going to speak that language. We are not going to wound them. We are not going to kill them. We are not going to fire a single shot. We are going to make them remember. Dr. Amara Singh, head of the Grief Response Bureau, spoke for the first time. She was 40, dark-skinned, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been appointed to the Bureau 3 days ago, specifically for this crisis. Before that, she had been a grief counselor. A therapist. A woman who sat in small rooms and listened to people describe the worst moments of their lives. She had spent 11 days listening to survivors. She had heard 800,000 stories. She carried them in her face. You could see it. The weight of them. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her hands trembled slightly when she held a glass of water. Remember what? She asked. Her voice was quiet. Controlled. The voice of a woman who had been crying in private and was determined not to cry in public. Every name, Hale said. Every face. Every story. Every person the moon's death killed. We are going to build a structure in orbit around the Zenthari home star. A structure that broadcasts those names to the Zenthari homeworld. Every day. Every hour. Every second. Forever. Silence. Long silence. The water pitcher gurgled again. Admiral Chen's fingers stopped drumming. General Tanaka's eyes went wide. Counselor Osei, the representative from the African Union, opened her mouth and closed it without speaking. General Tanaka spoke slowly. Carefully. as if she were handling something fragile. "You want to build a monument." "I want to build a weapon," Hale said. His voice was harder now. Sharper. The voice of a man who had made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. A weapon that fires memory instead of matter. A weapon that cannot be shot down, cannot be jammed, cannot be destroyed. A weapon powered by their own sun, so it never runs out of energy. A weapon that will outlast their civilization, their species, their star. A weapon that says, "We will never forget, and neither will you." Admiral Chen stared at him. His fingers were still. His face was unreadable. "That's not a weapon, Oren. That's a memorial. That's a gravestone. That's a plaque on a wall." "Yes," Hale said. "And that's why it's worse than anything we could build with guns. You can fight a gun. You can dodge a missile. You can shoot down a drone. You can negotiate with a fleet. You can surrender to an army. But you cannot shoot down a name. You cannot bomb a memory. You cannot make war on grief. You cannot negotiate with a mother holding her dead child's phone. You cannot surrender to a story told in a calm voice at 4 in the morning. You can only listen. And feel. And carry it. Forever." He sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table. His knuckles were white. "The Zenthari gave us 11 seconds of warning before they fired. 11 seconds. They didn't think we mattered enough to warn properly. They didn't think we'd remember. They thought we'd grieve for a year, rebuild, and forget. They thought time would heal us. They thought we'd move on. They thought the names would fade." His jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek jumped. "We will not move on. We will not forget. And we will make sure they never forget either. Not in 10 years. Not in 100. Not in 10,000. Not until their star burns out and their world goes dark and the last Zenthari draws their last breath. We will make them carry these names the way we carry them. Every day. Every hour. Every second. Forever. That is our retaliation. That is our weapon. And they cannot stop it." He looked around the table. 23 faces. The anger was still there. The grief was still there. But something else was forming now. Something colder. Quieter. More patient than rage. More permanent than fury. Something that would not burn out. Something that would not fade. The vote was unanimous. 23 hands raised. No dissent. No debate. No argument. No abstentions. Just hands in the air and eyes that had not dried out in 11 days. The project was designated Remembrance Eternal. Construction began in 36 hours. The structure was built at the L4 Lagrange point of the Zenthari home star, Zeth. L4 was a position of gravitational stability, a point where the pull of the star and the pull of the Zenthari homeworld balanced perfectly. An object placed there would remain indefinitely without expending fuel. It was 500 million kilometers from the homeworld. Close enough for a tight beam transmission. Far enough to be invisible to casual observation. Far enough to be ignored. The Zenthari had no colonies at L4. No stations. No patrols. Nothing. It was empty space. A dead point. A place no one went because there was nothing there to go to. No resources. No strategic value. No reason to be. That was why Earth chose it. Because no one would look. Because no one would care. Because the Zenthari would never think to check the empty place. The components were sent in pieces. 14 separate launches over 6 weeks. Each launch carried a different module. Coils. Solar panels. Transmission arrays. Power regulators. Structural supports. The launches were disguised as commercial satellite deployments registered under shell companies in 3 different neutral systems. The flight paths were routed through the Vrelian corridor and the Tesserine trade lane, adding weeks to the journey but making the cargo invisible. The Zenthari intelligence services were watching Earth's military fleet. They were watching the 47 warships in Earth's orbital defense grid. They were watching the shipyards. They were watching the training exercises. They were not watching commercial freighters carrying telecommunications equipment through neutral space. General Tanaka oversaw the construction. She did not sleep for 6 weeks. She lived in a shuttle, commuting between Earth orbit and the assembly point, checking every weld, every connection, every module. She was not an engineer. She was a soldier. But she understood what this was. She understood what it meant. And she was not going to let it be built wrong. She checked the welds herself. She checked the power connections. She checked the solar panel alignment. She checked the transmission array calibration. She checked everything twice. Then she checked it a 3rd time. The structure, when assembled, was not large. 300 meters across. A ring of superconducting coils surrounding a central transmission array. Solar collectors on the outer surface drew power directly from Zeth's light. The structure was self-sustaining. No fuel. No resupply. No maintenance crew. No human presence. It would operate alone, in the dark, at the L4 point, powered by starlight, speaking names into the void. No one would visit it. No one would tend it. It did not need tending. It needed only light. And light, from a star, was eternal. The materials were rated for 10,000 years of continuous operation. The solar collectors would degrade slowly, losing efficiency over millennia, but the transmission power was designed with enough surplus to compensate. At the 10,000-year mark, the collectors would be operating at roughly 40% efficiency. The signal would be weaker, but still present. Still audible. Still inescapable. The content of the broadcast was the harder part. Not the engineering. The content. Dr. Amara Singh and her team of 400 researchers spent 3 months compiling the names. 800,000 dead. But not just names. Not just a list. Faces. Voices. Stories. The texture of a life. The shape of a person. The small, specific details that made someone real instead of a number in a report. The way they laughed. The food they liked. The song they hummed while washing dishes. The name of their cat. The color of paint on their cheek. The Grief Response Bureau had been collecting testimonies from the moment the water receded. From survivors. From family members. From friends. From neighbors. From teachers. From shopkeepers. From strangers who had seen the dead in their final moments and could not stop talking about it. 400 researchers sitting in small rooms, listening. Recording. Writing it down. Preserving it. Making sure no detail was lost. Making sure no life was reduced to a number. Every person who had died in the tidal surges had a story. A life. A Tuesday morning that was supposed to be ordinary. A breakfast that was half-eaten. A conversation that was interrupted. A plan for the evening that would never happen. A book left open on a nightstand. A pair of shoes by the door. A coffee cup in the sink. Small things. Human things. Things that meant nothing to the universe and everything to the people who loved them. There was Anika Desai, age 7, Mumbai. She liked the color blue. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She had a cat named Pillow. She was killed at school. There was no warning. Her mother held her phone for 9 hours afterward and did not move. There was Thomas Okafor, age 43, Lagos. He was a fisherman. He sang while he worked. His laugh made strangers smile. He had 3 children and a wife named Adiz. He was in his boat when the surge hit. He tried to warn the harbor. He did not make it to shore. There was Maylin Jo, age 19, Mumbai. A university student. She was on the phone with her mother when the water hit. The connection lasted 4 seconds. Her mother heard the sound of the water. Then silence. Then nothing. Forever. She called the number every day for a year. It was never answered. There was Samuel Briggs, age 81, Lima. He refused to evacuate. He said he had survived 2 hurricanes and was not about to run from a wave. He sat in his living room with a cup of tea. Earl Grey. The cup was found on the roof. He was not. 800,000 stories. Each one told in the voice of someone who had loved them. Each one accompanied by a photograph, or a video, or a recording. Each one ending with the same 3 sentences. They were here. They mattered. They were taken. The broadcast was structured in cycles. Each cycle lasted 24 hours. In that time, every name was spoken. Every face was shown. Every story was told. Then the cycle began again. And again. And again. Without pause. Without variation. Without mercy. Without end. The transmission was omnidirectional. It broadcast on every frequency. Radio. Microwave. Infrared. Visible light. Ultraviolet. X-ray. Gravitational wave modulation. Every receiver on the Zenthari homeworld would pick it up. Every screen. Every speaker. Every communication device. Every entertainment system. Every emergency alert channel. Every frequency used by every piece of technology the Zenthari had ever built. It could not be turned off. It could not be blocked. The signal was too strong, too broad, too fundamental. Jamming it would require shutting down the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which would mean shutting down civilization. Every hospital. Every transport system. Every communication network. Every life support system. To silence the names, the Zenthari would have to kill themselves. And the final element. The simplest. The cruelest. The one that Amara Singh had insisted on, the one she had fought for in the design meetings, the one she had cried over when she proposed it. A counter. A running tally of days. Displayed at the start of every cycle. Spoken in a calm, steady voice. This is day 1 of remembrance. This is day 2 of remembrance. This is day 3 of remembrance. Counting up. Every day. For 10,000 years. A drumbeat of time passing. Marking the distance between the atrocity and the present. Reminding the Zenthari, every morning, that the wound was still open. That Earth had not healed. That Earth had not moved on. That Earth would never move on. That the grief was not fading. That the names were not growing quiet. That the dead were not being forgotten. The construction was completed on day 94. The structure was activated on day 95. No ceremony. No announcement. No warning. No declaration of intent. No broadcast to the galaxy saying, "Look what we have done." No press conference. No speech. The Zenthari had given them 11 seconds. Earth gave them 0. High Speaker Vale Thren was eating breakfast when the names began. He was in his private chamber on the 47th floor of the governance spire in Zeth capital. The room was large, sparse, furnished in the Zenthari style, low platforms, smooth surfaces, no soft things. He sat on a platform and ate a bowl of grain porridge. He was reading the morning intelligence summary on a wall screen. The summary mentioned Earth. Earth was quiet. Earth had not responded to the ultimatum. Earth was building something in orbit, probably shipyards, probably weapons, probably the usual emotional human response. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that required action. He took a spoonful of porridge. He chewed. He swallowed. He reached for the next page of the summary. Then his personal comm chimed. Then his wall screen flickered. Then the overhead speaker crackled. Then his wrist device vibrated. Then the lights in the room pulsed in a pattern that was not a malfunction. Every device in the room activated simultaneously. Every screen. Every speaker. Every surface capable of producing sound or image. And from all of them, at once, came a voice. A human voice. Calm. Steady. Not angry. Not screaming. Not threatening. Not demanding. Just speaking. Like a teacher reading a lesson. Like a parent reading a bedtime story. Like someone who had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it. Anika Desai. Age 7. Mumbai, India, Earth. She liked the color blue. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She had a cat named Pillow. She was killed by tidal surge on the morning of March 14, 2241. She was at school. There was no warning. She did not suffer, but she was afraid. Her mother held her phone for 9 hours afterward and did not move. Anika was here. She mattered. She was taken. A photograph appeared on the wall screen. A girl with dark hair and a smear of blue paint on her cheek. Smiling. Holding up a painting of a cat. The cat had 5 legs. Then the next name. And the next. And the next. Calm. Steady. Endless. Vale Thren set down his spoon. He stared at the screen. He reached for the device controls and tried to turn it off. The controls did not respond. He tried the manual override. It did not respond. He pulled the power cord from the wall. The screen stayed on. It was drawing power from the building's grid, and the building's grid was receiving the signal, and the signal was coming from everywhere at once. He could not turn it off. He left the room. He walked into the corridor. The corridor speakers were playing the names. He went to the elevator. The elevator speakers were playing the names. He reached the ground floor. The lobby screens were playing the names. He stepped outside into the morning air of Zeth capital. The city's public address system was playing the names. Every billboard. Every transit screen. Every personal device in every citizen's hand. Every speaker in every shop and office and school and hospital and home. The names. The faces. The stories. Calm. Steady. Endless. A woman on the street stopped walking. She stood still and listened. A man beside her did the same. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, the streets of Zeth capital were full of people standing still, looking up at the screens, listening to the dead speak. 800,000 of them. Told in the voices of those who loved them. Accompanied by photographs of children, of old people, of young couples, of workers, of students, of parents. Each one ending with the same 3 sentences. They were here. They mattered. They were taken. By the end of the first hour, the Governance Council was in emergency session. Every council member was hearing the broadcast. They could not escape it. It was in the walls. In the air. In the devices they could not put down because their duties required them. They could not close their ears. They could not close their eyes. The names came from everywhere. They came from the ceiling. They came from the floor. They came from the walls. They came from the devices in their pockets. They came from the screens on their wrists. There was no silence. There would never be silence again. Turn it off, demanded Counselor Male, a tall Zenthari with silver markings on his face. His voice was tight. Panicked. Find the source and destroy it. Now. Today. This hour. We've identified the source, said General Soren, the military commander. He was standing at the far end of the chamber, his posture rigid, his 4 eyes fixed on a data pad. His voice was careful. Controlled. The voice of a man delivering news he knew would not be received well. It's a structure at the L4 point. 300 meters across. Solar-powered. Self-sustaining. Human construction. They built it in secret over the past 3 months. We missed it. Intelligence missed it. I take responsibility for that. Then destroy it. Send a fleet. Vaporize it. I don't care how you do it. Make it stop. We can't. The room went quiet. The names continued in the background. Calm. Steady. A fisherman who sang. A student on the phone with her mother. An old man with a cup of tea. Why can't we? Zenthari asked. His voice was quiet. He had walked for an hour through the streets. He had heard 200 names. He had seen 200 faces. He did not want to hear 200 more. But he would. They all would. There was no escaping it. Because it's broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, General Soren said. Including the frequencies our military communications use. Including the frequencies our targeting systems use. Including the frequencies our navigation systems use. If we fire on it, our own weapons guidance will be disrupted by our own attempt to override the signal. The structure is also built with redundant systems. 14 backup arrays. Destroying one module activates the others. It would take sustained bombardment over several hours to fully disable all of them, and during that time, the signal would continue uninterrupted. And after we disabled them, the humans could build another. And another. And another. We would be fighting an enemy that does not fight back. That only remembers. And remembers. And remembers. Then we endure it, Zenthari said. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them harder against the surface to stop the shaking. We endure it and we wait. The humans will run out of things to say eventually. They have 800,000 names. They will run out. General Soren shook his head. Slowly. Carefully. As if delivering a diagnosis he wished he did not have to deliver. The broadcast is structured in 24-hour cycles. It loops. The content is pre-recorded. It will repeat indefinitely. The solar collectors provide unlimited power. The structure is rated for 10,000 years of operation. They will not run out, High Speaker. They have made sure of it. They will never run out. The room was silent. Except for the names. Always the names. Calm. Steady. Patient. 10,000 years, Counselor Mail whispered. At minimum, Soren said. Vale Thren put his head in his hands. The names continued. A fisherman who sang. A student on the phone. An old man with a cup of tea. A child with blue paint on her cheek. They were here. They mattered. They were taken. The broadcast was omnidirectional. It was not aimed solely at the Zenthari. It reached every system within range of the Zeth star's gravitational influence. And within a week, the signal propagated further, carried by relay stations and commercial networks and the simple physics of electromagnetic radiation, until it reached every inhabited system in the galaxy. Every species heard it. Every world heard it. Every child, every elder, every soldier, every diplomat, every merchant, every farmer, every artist, every thief. Everyone heard the names. The galaxy listened. On Vrelia, the High Queen was in the middle of a war council. She was planning an invasion of the Kethari border worlds. A simple territorial grab. Quick. Brutal. Efficient. 3 fleets, 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers. The Kethari border defenses were weak. The invasion would take 6 weeks. Casualties would be acceptable. The mathematics were clean. The projections were favorable. The war would be over before the autumn. Her generals were presenting fleet deployment options when every screen in the war room flickered. A human voice began speaking. Calm. Steady. Not angry. Thomas Okafor. Age 43. Lagos, Nigeria, Earth. He was a fisherman. He sang while he worked. His laugh made strangers smile. He had 3 children and a wife named Adiz. He was killed by tidal surge on the morning of March 14, 2241. He was in his boat. He tried to warn the harbor. He did not make it to shore. Thomas was here. He mattered. He was taken. The High Queen raised a hand. The generals stopped talking. They looked at her. They looked at the screens. They listened. The names continued. One after another. Faces on the screens. Stories in the speakers. Lives told simply, told fully, told in the voices of those who loved them. The High Queen listened to 43 names before she spoke again. She sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. A photograph of an old woman holding a cat. A child with blue paint on her cheek. A young man smiling in a university courtyard. Pause the invasion planning, she said. Her generals stared at her. My queen, the deployment window closes in 3 weeks. If we delay. Pause it. I said pause it. She did not look at them. She looked at the screen. I want to hear this. The invasion was never resumed. The High Queen could not explain why when pressed by her council. She could only say that something about the calm, steady recitation of the dead made the idea of creating more dead feel wrong. Not immoral. Not illegal. Just wrong. Like adding noise to a song that was already complete. Like breaking something that could not be fixed. Like speaking loudly in a room where someone was trying to remember a name. On Kethera Prime, the Free Fleet admirals heard the broadcast during a strategy session. They were planning raids on merchant convoys. Small targets. Easy kills. Low risk. High profit. The broadcast interrupted their planning. They listened. Not because they wanted to. Because they could not turn it off. Because the names were in the walls. In the air. In the devices on their wrists. In the speakers overhead. They listened for 3 days. The names cycled. The stories repeated. The counter increment. This is day 4 of Remembrance. This is day 5 of Remembrance. On the 4th day, Admiral Threlvos cancelled the raid orders. His officers gathered in the briefing room. They asked why. He stood at the viewport of his flagship, looking out at the stars, his back to them. His shoulders were heavy. His voice was quiet. Because I don't want to be someone's name, he said. He could not explain it further. He did not try. He cancelled the raids and went to his quarters and sat in the dark and listened to the names and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in 20 years of military service. Something heavy. Something that sat on his ribs and made it hard to breathe. Something that felt like loss, but was not his loss. Something that felt like grief, but was not his grief. Something borrowed. Something inherited. Something that had settled into him through the speakers and the screens and the calm, steady voice, and would not leave. Across the galaxy, the effect was the same. Not everywhere. Not in every species. Not in every heart. But in enough. In the ones that mattered. In the ones that were planning wars, or conducting raids, or enslaving populations, or glassing worlds. The broadcast reached them all. And it did not threaten them. It did not demand anything. It did not say stop or we will destroy you. It did not say submit or suffer. It simply said, they were here. They mattered. They were taken. And that was worse than any threat. A threat you could fight. A threat you could dismiss. A threat you could call bluff. But a name? A face? A 7-year-old girl who wanted to be a veterinarian? A fisherman who sang? An old man with a cup of tea who refused to run? You could not fight that. You could only sit with it. And feel it. And let it change you. And let it make you quieter. And let it make you stop. The wars did not stop overnight. The raids did not end in a day. But they slowed. They hesitated. Commanders paused before giving orders. Soldiers hesitated before pulling triggers. Not because they feared Earth's retaliation. Because they feared becoming a name in someone else's broadcast. Because they feared being spoken in a calm, steady voice by a stranger who loved them. Because they feared being reduced to 3 sentences, they were here. They mattered. They were taken. The galaxy grew quieter. Not silent. Not yet. But quieter. The volume of violence turned down, 1 notch at a time, as 400 species listened to 800,000 names and felt the weight of them settle into their bones. 1 year passed. The counter read, "This is day 365 of Remembrance." The Zenthari had tried everything. They had sent fleets to destroy the structure. 3 separate attempts. Each time, the fleet arrived at L4 and found the signal so overwhelming that their targeting systems could not lock. The broadcast was on every frequency, including the frequencies their weapons used. To fire, they would have to fire blind. They fired blind. They hit the structure. Modules broke. Backup modules activated. The signal never stopped. Not for a second. Not for a heartbeat. Not for the span of a single breath. They had tried jamming. Every frequency the Zenthari jammed, the broadcast shifted to another. It was on radio, on microwave, on light, on gravity waves. To block it fully, they would need to shut down every receiver on the planet. Every device. Every system. They would need to return to a pre-electrical age. They would need to kill their own civilization to silence the names. They had tried negotiating. They sent envoys to Earth. 3 delegations over the course of the year. They offered concessions. Trade agreements. Territory in the Orion Corridor. Reparations. Resources. Technology. Anything. Everything. Just make it stop. Just turn it off. Just give us silence. Just give us one morning without the names. Earth's response was always the same. Delivered by Secretary General Hale, sitting in his office in Geneva, looking into the camera with tired, steady eyes. A single sentence, spoken slowly, clearly, without anger, without triumph, without anything except the flat, patient weight of certainty: we are not asking for anything. We are remembering. You are welcome to listen. The Zenthari could not fight a memorial. They could not declare war on grief. They could not sanction a name. They could not blockade a memory. There was no treaty to sign, no concession to extract, no enemy to defeat. There was only the broadcast. Steady. Calm. Endless. Patient as stone. Patient as water. Patient as the slow, grinding work of time on a world that had forgotten how to be still. 5 years passed. This is day 1826 of Remembrance. The Zenthari changed. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Inevitably. The way water changes stone. The way wind changes a landscape. Slowly. Grain by grain. Year by year. The broadcast was a constant presence in their lives. It was in the morning when they woke. It was in the evening when they slept. It was in the spaces between. It was the sound of their world now. The background hum. The rhythm beneath everything else. Children grew up hearing the names. They learned the human words for a mother and father and child because those words appeared in the stories. They learned what a veterinarian was because Anika Desai wanted to be one. They learned what a fisherman was because Thomas Okafor sang while he worked. They learned what grief meant because 800,000 voices spoke it every day. They learned what love meant because every story was told by someone who loved the person they were describing. And the children absorbed it. Not as a lesson. As a fact. As a truth. As the shape of the world they lived in. The names became part of Zenthari culture. Not by choice. By osmosis. By saturation. You could not live in a world where the names played constantly and not be shaped by them. Children drew pictures of Anika Desai in school. Not because they were told to. Because they had heard her story so many times that she felt real to them. Familiar. Like a friend they had never met but had always known. They drew her with blue paint on her cheek. They drew Pillow the cat. They drew the five-legged painting. And they pinned the drawings to the walls of their classrooms, and the drawings stayed there, and new children came and saw them, and the cycle continued. The High Speaker, Vale Thren, resigned after 3 years. He stood before the Governance Council and said he could not govern while hearing the names. He said every decision he made felt weighted by them. He said he could not order a military action, could not authorize a punishment, could not dismiss a complaint, without hearing in his mind, they were here. They mattered. They were taken. He said the names had gotten inside him and he could not get them out. He said he was tired. He said he wanted to be quiet. He said he wanted to sit somewhere and listen to the names without having to make a decision about anything. He moved to a rural district. He became a teacher. He taught children to read. He never spoke about the broadcast publicly. But his students said he sometimes stopped mid-lesson and listened to something they could not hear. And his eyes would go far away. And he would whisper, very softly, "I'm sorry." And then he would blink and return to the lesson and pretend nothing had happened. And the children would look at each other and go back to their books. And the names continued in the background. Calm. Steady. Endless. 10 years passed. This is day 3651 of Remembrance. The Zenthari military was half the size it had been. Not because of any treaty or disarmament agreement. Because enlistment had dropped. Young Zenthari did not want to join a military that had broken a moon and killed 800,000 people. They had grown up hearing those names. They had grown up knowing what their government had done. The shame was not imposed. It was inherited. Passed from the broadcast to the culture to the children. A quiet, steady, inescapable shame. Like gravity. Like weather. Like the sound of your own breathing. You could not escape it. You could only carry it. And in carrying it, you changed. You became softer. Quieter. More careful with the lives of others. Because you knew, in your bones, that every life you ended would become a name. And that name would be spoken. Calmly. Steadily. Forever. The Zenthari did not hate Earth. That was the strangest part. The part that confused the other species. The part that the galactic historians would argue about for centuries. They could not hate a species that had not fired a single shot. That had not demanded tribute. That had not threatened further violence. That had not built a fleet or trained an army or drawn a border in the sand and said, "Cross this and die." Earth had simply remembered. And in remembering, had made the Zenthari remember too. And in that shared remembering, hatred was impossible. You cannot hate someone for grieving. You cannot rage at someone for refusing to forget. You cannot be angry at someone for loving their dead. You can only be silent. And listen. And carry the weight. 20 years passed. This is day 7303 of Remembrance. Priya Desai was 57 years old. She lived in a rebuilt Mumbai, in a small apartment overlooking the sea. The sea was calm now. The tides had stabilized. The debris ring where the moon used to be was visible in the night sky, a thin silver line, like a scar. Like a reminder. Like a wound that had healed but would always be visible. She still had the phone. The one with Anika's photograph. The screen was cracked now, and the battery barely held a charge. But she kept it. She looked at the photograph every morning. The blue paint on Anika's cheek. The smile. The two uneven pigtails. The five-legged cat. The 7-year-old certainty that the world was good and safe and full of cats to be treated and paintings to be made. Priya had never watched the broadcast. She could not. She knew it existed. She knew the names were being spoken every day to the Zenthari. She knew her daughter's name was among them. She knew Anika's story was being told in a calm, steady voice to an alien species that had killed her. She knew the words. She was at school. There was no warning. She did not suffer, but she was afraid. She knew them because someone had read them to her once, a year after the event. She had listened. She had not cried. She had said, yes. That's right. That's what happened. And then she had gone back to her apartment and made tea and watched the sea. She did not need the broadcast to remember. But she was glad it existed. She was glad that somewhere, on a world she would never visit, under a sun she would never feel, an alien child was hearing Anika's name and drawing her picture and wondering what a veterinarian was. She was glad the universe had not let Anika disappear. She was glad someone, somewhere, was saying her name. Every day. Forever. She was glad that Anika was not just a memory in her mother's mind, fragile and fading. She was glad Anika was a sound in the walls of a world she would never see. A voice in the air. A story told in a calm, steady voice. A name that would outlast the stars. She put the phone down. She made tea. She watched the sea. The debris ring caught the morning light. She whispered, "Good morning, Anika." And the day began. 50 years passed. This is day 18,263 of Remembrance. The galaxy was quiet. Not silent. There was still trade. Still travel. Still politics and argument and the small, noisy business of 400 species sharing a galaxy. But the wars were gone. The big ones. The ones that consumed systems and glassed worlds and killed millions. The ones that made names. The ones that left mothers holding phones on rooftops for 9 hours. Those were gone. Not because of a treaty. Not because of a peacekeeping force. Not because of a threat or a weapon or a fleet. Because of a broadcast. A 300-meter ring of metal and coil, sitting at the L4 point of an ordinary star, powered by sunlight, speaking names into the void. Calm. Steady. Endless. Patient as grief. Patient as love. Patient as the slow, grinding work of memory on a galaxy that had forgotten how to feel. The Zenthari had changed beyond recognition. They were not the same species that had fired the gravitational lance 50 years ago. They were quieter. More reflective. More careful. Their art was different now. Softer. More personal. Less about power and conquest. More about small things. A cup of tea. A child's drawing. A song sung while working. The Zenthari painted pictures of Anika Desai. They wrote songs about Thomas Okafor. They told stories about Samuel Briggs and his 2 hurricanes. They had taken the dead of another world and made them their own. Not by choice. By saturation. By the slow, steady, inescapable work of 800,000 names spoken every day for 50 years. They had a word for it, a new word in their language, Veilthrem. It meant something like the weight of a name you never earned but must carry. It was their word for the broadcast. For the grief that was not theirs but lived in them anyway. For the dead they had never met but would never forget. For the children with blue paint on their cheeks and the fishermen who sang and the old men who refused to run. The Galactic Assembly met once a year. The meetings were shorter now. Less contentious. The delegates spoke softly. They listened more. They interrupted less. Not because they were afraid. Because they had learned, from 50 years of steady names, that every person in every room was a story. That every decision had a face attached to it. That power exercised carelessly became a name in someone's broadcast. That the only thing worse than killing someone was making them forgettable. No one said it aloud. No one needed to. The silence said it for them. Secretary General Orrin Hale was dead now. 20 years dead. He had lived to see the 30th anniversary of the broadcast. He had watched the counter tick past 10,000 days and felt something in his chest loosen. Not peace. Not forgiveness. Those were not his to give. But a kind of completion. The names were being spoken. The dead were being remembered. The universe was not allowed to look away. That was all he had wanted. That was all he had built. That was enough. He had died in his sleep, in the bunker beneath the Alps, which had been converted into a library. A library of names. 800,000 volumes, each one a life. His last words, recorded by his bedside nurse, were, "Keep it going. Don't let them stop." They had not stopped. They would not stop. The structure at L4 hummed with solar energy. The coils pulsed. The signal propagated. The names cycled. 24 hours. Every name. Every face. Every story. Then again. Then again. Then again. Without pause. Without variation. Without end. On Zeth, a child was born. She was small and pale and had 4 eyes arranged in a vertical line, like all Zenthari. Her parents named her Kale. She was 3 days old. She had never done anything wrong. She had never hurt anyone. She would grow up in a world where the names were always playing. Where Anika Desai was as familiar as a family member. Where the words "they were here," "they mattered," "they were taken" were as constant as gravity. As constant as breath. As constant as the beating of a heart. Kale would grow up knowing what her species had done. Not as history. Not as a chapter in a textbook. As a sound in the walls. A voice in the air. A presence in every room. She would never know a world without the names. She would never know a moment of silence from them. They would be the background of her life. The hum beneath every thought. The rhythm beneath every heartbeat. The first sound she heard in the morning and the last sound she heard at night. And she would be better for it. Not because she was guilty. Because she was aware. Because the weight of the names would teach her, from her first breath to her last, that every life was a story. That every death was a wound. That forgetting was the only true violence. That the only adequate response to loss was to remember. Fully. Completely. Forever. Without flinching. Without looking away. Without letting time smooth the edges. She would grow up and she would never fire a weapon. She would never order a killing. She would never break a world. Not because she was afraid of Earth's retaliation. Not because she feared punishment. Because she had heard 18,000 days of names and she knew, in her bones, in the deepest part of herself, In the place where identity lived, that she could not bear to add a name to the list. That she could not bear to be the reason someone sat on a roof for 9 hours holding a phone and not moving. That she could not bear to be the reason a mother whispered "good morning" to a photograph every day for the rest of her life. The galaxy was quiet. The wars had stopped. The raids had ended. The blockades had lifted. The enslavements had ceased. Not because Earth had threatened. Not because Earth had punished. Not because Earth had built a bigger gun or a faster ship or a deadlier bomb. Because Earth had remembered. And in remembering, had made the galaxy remember too. Had made the galaxy feel the weight of every name. Had made the galaxy understand that every life was a universe, and every death was an ending that could not be undone, and the only thing left to do was to speak the name. Calmly. Steadily. Forever. The structure at L4 turned slowly in the light of the Zeth star. Its coils hummed. Its signal propagated. The names cycled. Anika Desai. Age 7. She liked the color blue. Thomas Okafor. Age 43. He sang while he worked. Meilin Zhou. Age 19. She was on the phone with her mother. Samuel Briggs. Age 81. He said he'd survived 2 hurricanes. 800,000 names. Spoken every day. For 50 years. For 100 years. For 10,000 years. For as long as the star burned and the coils held and the signal propagated. For as long as the light of Zeth reached the structure and the structure turned it into sound. For as long as the universe had ears to hear and hearts to feel and the decency to be silent in the presence of grief. The galaxy listened. The galaxy was silent. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of defeat. Not the silence of a species cowering before a greater power. The silence of reverence. The silence of a species that had been reminded, gently and endlessly, that every life was a universe. That every death was a catastrophe. That the only appropriate response to the destruction of a world was to remember it. Forever. Without flinching. Without looking away. Without letting time heal what should not be healed. The broadcast continued. This is day 18,264 of remembrance. They were here. They mattered. They were taken. And the galaxy, 400 species strong, sat in the quiet and listened and did not forget. And would not forget. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not in 10,000 years. Not ever. The end.